Hello and welcome to English for Philosophy students. Today we are in lesson number 20 of our study of Jordan Peterson's Lessons for Life. We are in rule number 4, and actually it's called Jordan Peterson's Rules for Life. Anyway, we're in rule number 4. And this is our 20th lesson, our 7th lesson in rule number 4. Now, last week, let me see what I've got here. Let's go to this. Last week, we ended with a question. The question is, how can we benefit from our imaginativeness, our ability to improve the future, without continually denigrating our current insufficiently successful and worthless lives. So cut this in half. How can we benefit from our imaginativeness toward improving the future without continually denigrating the present, our worthless failure in the present? How can we benefit from this ability to imagine something better and to act in such a way as to bring about a better future? To act as our ability to imagine a way to act in such a way as to bring about a better future. How can we benefit from that without the negative side effect of seeing the present as lacking and also seeing ourselves as lacking? So, we will move into today's reading looking for the answer to that question. The first step, perhaps, is to take stock. Who are you? When you buy a house and prepare to live in it, you hire an inspector to list all its faults, as it is, in reality, now, not as you wish it could be. You'll even pay him for the bad news. You need to know. You need to discover the home's hidden flaws. You need to know whether they are cosmetic imperfections or structural inadequacies. You need to know because you can't fix something if you don't know it's broken. And you're broken. You need an inspector, the internal critic. It could play that role if you could get it on track, if you and it could cooperate. It could help you take stock. But you must walk through your psychological house with it and listen judiciously to what it says. Maybe you are a handyman's dream, a real fixer-upper. How can you start your renovations without being demoralized, even crushed, by your internal critic's lengthy and painful report of your inadequacies? Okay, first, I want to point out that this question, give me a second, I'm trying to get my color back. I want this to be blue. This question How can you start your renovations without being demoralized, even crushed, by your internal critic's lengthy and painful report of your inadequacies? This question is the same question as we began with today. So this question is a restatement of this. For the structure of the argument, we need to see that this paragraph does not answer the question. It only defines some terms. So let's look a little more closely. First of all, how can I get this back? I want it to be black again. All right, so we started with a question. How can we not be demoralized with the present and yet still benefit from the ability to imagine a positive future? The first step, this suggests that the answer is going to be complex. It will be multi-steps. It is not a simple answer. It is an answer which requires multiple paragraphs. The first point needing to be made is, or the first step in avoiding being demoralized, the first step, perhaps, maybe, is to take stock. What does it mean to take stock? Take stock is a phrasal verb. It is a verb made up of two words. To take stock is one verb. It means to evaluate what you have. What are your assets? When you, for example, buy a business, your first step is to take stock of what the business has, what you have to work with. Evaluate what you have. So take stock. The first step is to take stock. Who are you? So we are evaluating ourselves. So as we take stock, our first question is, who are you? He is now going to give an analogy from buying a house. When you buy a house and prepare to live in it, you hire an inspector to list all its faults, as it is in reality now, not as you wish it could be. Okay, so if you are going to buy a house, you are going to pay a man to look at it, to find out what is wrong with it before you buy it. You will pay an inspector to take stock. In fact, paying the inspector is part of your process of taking stock. And you want to know the faults as it is in reality now. For some reason here we go. As it is in reality now. So this is a picture of the present, the sucky present, the inadequate, bad, worthless present. See all the things that are wrong now. Not as you wish it could be. So that would be in your imagination of improving it. No. You don't hire someone to say what you could do with the house. You hire someone to say what's wrong with it now. You are taking stock, not imagining the future. You'll even pay him for the bad news. The bad news that the house has a leaky roof and a bad foundation and termites in the wood. You pay him because you need to know. You need to know. You need to discover the home's hidden flaws. You need to know whether they, what's they? The hidden flaws. Okay? They refers to the hidden flaws. You need to know whether the hidden flaws are cosmetic imperfections or structural inadequacies. As you read your English, it is important for you to read ahead so that you don't stop too soon and get the wrong idea. For example, here you could say, you need to know whether they are cosmetic. That would be a complete sentence. But it doesn't really stop there. It's cosmetic imperfections, structural inadequacies. You need to keep reading until you get to the punctuation to make sure you don't stop too soon and get the wrong sense. You need to know because you can't fix something if you don't know it's broken. And you are broken. Remember, when you have this, it means you are. This kind of an apostrophe means a letter is dropped out and two words are put together. You are broken. So he brings the analogy back from the house to us. We must take stock of the present because we are broken and we want to fix ourselves. And we cannot fix something if we do not know what is broken. You need an inspector. The internal critic, it could play that role. What role? The role of the inspector. That role. It could play the role of the inspector. If you could get it on track means going in the right direction and not turning back to destroy you. It's like a wild horse. You can harness it to take you somewhere, or it can turn and trample you. The internal critic can fuel your positive movement, or it can retard your positive movement by demoralizing you and making you despair. So, if you could get the internal critic on track, comma, if you and it could cooperate. So, this phrase goes with this phrase. It could play that role, number one, if you could get it on track. Number two, if you and it could cooperate. Two conditions. It, what's the it? It is the internal critic. Where is the internal critic? Right here. It could help you take stock. The internal critic could help you take stock. But you must walk through your psychological house with it and listen judiciously to what it says. Why do we have a but here? But always means something different. So here we say, the internal critic could help you. If you do this and this, the critic could be an asset. But you must do this difficult thing, or else it will not be an asset, it will be a disaster to you. So that's why the word but is there, because it will be an asset, but it will not be an asset if you don't do this difficult thing. And the difficult thing is you must walk through your psychological house with it. Do you want to walk through your psychological house in the presence of an internal critic? It's one thing to walk through a house you are thinking of buying with a critic pointing out, this is bad, and that is bad, and this is bad, and that is bad. But if he is walking through you and your life and saying, this is bad, and that is bad, and that is bad, and that is bad, that is much more devastating. Also, walk through suggests over a lot of time. It does not suggest a quick inventory. It suggests a process. Just the words suggest something that is done over weeks or months or years, not a single session. So, if you want your internal critic to be an asset, you must walk through your psychological house with it and listen judiciously to what it says. Remember, the internal critic can be extreme. It can say to you, because you do not play piano like Mozart, you're worthless. The internal critic does not always consider the full complexity of your situation, your strengths and weaknesses. It will compare you directly with another person in your area of weakness compared to their area of strength. You against Mozart in music. That's why you must listen judiciously as a judge, not accepting everything, not as a pupil, not as a student, not as an acolyte, not as a repenting disciple. No, you must listen to the internal critic judiciously as a judge to determine whether what it says is true or false and to what degree. Maybe you're a handyman's dream. Notice we have this business, so this is you are. Maybe you are a handyman's dream. This is a saying that reflects a house that needs a lot of work, but a handyman can turn it into something beautiful. So a handyman's dream needs a lot of repair, but it is essentially valuable, as opposed to a heap of junk that nobody should buy. It should be knocked down as a house. Maybe you are a handyman's dream, a real fixer-upper. Fixer-upper is the same as handyman's dream. They are synonyms. Both of them refer to literally to a house that needs a lot of work but is basically sound. And both of them can be used in analogy to refer to a person or something other than a house. And then we're at the end. How can you start your renovations without being demoralized, even crushed, by your internal critic's lengthy and painful report of your inadequacies? So my question to you is, what did this paragraph do to advance the argument? What did this paragraph contribute to our thinking? We are beginning with essentially the same question, almost exactly the same. So, have we made no progress? I think we have made some progress. Up here, it is talking about, in the abstract, human beings' characteristic ability to imagine something that is not reality, to imagine a future possibility such that they could begin from the present and improve things to make it better in the future. This is from an abstract point of view, this is just a characteristic ability of human beings. In this paragraph, it has been made very specific and applied to self-development, to personal change. Not just a change of the world, but change of me. So the argument has been brought from the clouds down to the personal level. But the question remains, when you are looking at yourself as you are now in the present, and you are not as good as you can imagine yourself being in the future, how do you avoid self-hatred? How do you avoid being demoralized? So we're going to get another color of pencil to take a look at that question. We'll go to red. Oops. Here's a hint. The future is like the past, but there's a crucial difference. The past is fixed, but the future, it could be better. It could be better, some precise amount. The amount that can be achieved, perhaps, in a day with some minimal engagement. The present is eternally flawed. But where you start might not be as important as the direction you are heading. Perhaps happiness is always to be found in the journey uphill, and not in the fleeting sense of satisfaction awaiting at the next peak. Much of happiness is hope, no matter how deep the underworld in which that hope is conceived. Let's move back. I'm going to begin with the question in the previous paragraph. How can you start your renovations on yourself, without being demoralized, even crushed, by your internal critic's lengthy and painful report of your inadequacies? How can you avoid being crushed? Here's a hint. When he says a hint, he means this is a tip, would be another word for it. It's not the full answer. It's just a little nudge in the right direction. Here's a hint. The future is like the past, but there's a crucial difference. The past is fixed, but the future, it could be better. Let's think about that for a moment. The question is, how can we avoid being crushed by our own inadequacies? Here's a hint. The future is like the past, but there's a difference in that the past is fixed and the future could be better. This is a hint to how we cannot be crushed. So, imagine for one moment. Think to your past. Think to something bad that you did, some inadequacy that you dislike. You don't like it, you are ashamed of it, you wish you could change. Yet in the past, you cannot change it. It's done. It is fixed. And if the future were fixed like the past, then you would be crushed because you would have no hope of ever changing that bad aspect of yourself. But since the future is not fixed, that bad aspect can be changed. And in the future, you can be clean of that. The past cannot be cleaned. It is indelibly tainted by this failing. But the future, you can clean that stain off, and in the future you can be clean and not have that failure. So, a hint about not being demoralized about the present is the fact that although you cannot escape your guilt in the past, you can escape the guilt in the future of new offenses. So the future could be better. It could be better some precise amount. The amount that can be achieved, perhaps, in a day, with some minimal engagement. For example, in my case, I do not like how fat I am. I do not like my weight. I look back at my life and I think I have had a bit of a weight problem all my life. It is possible for me to look to the future and imagine myself being more physically fit and more attractive, less overweight and more attractive because of being healthier. I can take a step in that direction by doing something very small today. For example, I could eat a salad before I begin my other food for lunch. If I begin with salad, I will not eat as many French fries. It will push out the French fries, and I will not be hungry. The only discipline is to put the salad first instead of leaving it till the end, and then I only eat half the salad because I'm full from hamburger and French fries. If I put the salad first, then I won't finish my hamburger and French fries because I'll be full. And I will be on the way to being healthier. This is a very small engagement. A very small engagement means an action that I take to address the problem. It's very small to put the salad first instead of last. And yet, it will improve my future a small but measurable amount. So, the future could be better. Some precise amount, the amount that can be achieved perhaps in a day with some minimal engagement. To tell you the truth, on any day that I put the salad first and leave half of the hamburger and french fries, I feel better about myself. My present is better on that day. So it really does help, even when it's just a little bit. So, the present is eternally flawed. So that means no matter whether even if I lose 40 pounds, I will still look at myself and say, wow, you could look better. Maybe you should dye your hair, or maybe you should get liposuction, or maybe you should buy new clothes. No matter what I do, at any moment of the present, it will always be flawed. I will always be able to imagine something better. The present is eternally flawed, intrinsically. But where you start might not be as important as the direction you are heading. So if I start here at this weight and eat salad first, maybe that's just as good as starting 40 pounds lighter and deciding I'm going to walk 1 mile for exercise. They're equally good. Each one is take stock in the present, identify some small action that will make things a little bit better, and through minimal engagement, make things a little better the next day. It doesn't matter whether I start here or start 40 pounds lighter or start somewhere else. Where you start might not be as important as the direction you are heading. I read a story once about 2 men who met together on a hill, a mountain. They met together and then they shook hands and they continued on their way. One was going up the mountain, the other was going down the mountain. At the point where they met, on the side of the mountain, if you saw them, you would not be able to tell that one was going up and the other was going down. Yet, their destinies were opposite. So maybe it doesn't matter as much where you start as which direction you are going. 2 young girls may be good friends today. Maybe one of them used to be 100 pounds overweight. She has lost weight and is currently looking pretty good. The other one used to be a beauty queen. She has gained some weight. She still looks pretty good. But in 10 years, she will be terrible. And the first one will be fit and healthy for the rest of her life. At the moment they meet, they look the same. But one's destiny is terrible, the other's destiny is good. So it doesn't matter so much where you meet or what the point you start as the direction you are heading. Perhaps, and this is now in italics. Italics is this font that is sideways. Why is this not working for me? See, italics go like this, regular print goes straight up. Italics goes sideways. This is in italics, meaning it should have special attention paid. Okay, so perhaps, hold on. Perhaps happiness is always found in the journey uphill and not in the fleeting sense of satisfaction awaiting at the next peak. So perhaps happiness is found as we are working toward a goal, not in the fleeting, the short-lived sense of satisfaction that we get when we achieve a goal. If you achieve a goal, you feel happy for a little while, and then you want another goal. Most of our lives are spent working toward achieving goals, not enjoying the moment when we have achieved them. It's a funny thing. Notice, happiness is always to be found in the journey uphill, not the journey downhill. Imagine the journey downhill. Imagine a friend of yours who drinks too much, and every morning he wakes up with an alcohol-induced headache, and his liver is struggling. And half the time, in addition to drinking, he is taking drugs, both to wake himself up and to put himself to sleep. And while he is drinking and drugging, he is partying and having fun and chasing women and all this kind of stuff. He would say he is living the good life. He is partying all the time. But he is on a downhill path, and happiness is not there. Imagine the same friend if he changed, joined Alcoholics Anonymous, became clean and sober, and began the hard work of moving his life uphill toward having a family, a wife, children, self-respect, a good job, a house, enough money to leave to his children when he dies, respect of the community. Where is more happiness? In the partying lifestyle that leads you to death in the streets, or in the work of becoming a person that everybody respects, including you respecting yourself? Happiness is in the uphill journey, doing the hard work, not the downhill journey of doing whatever is easy. And not in the fleeting sense of satisfaction awaiting at the next peak. The next peak is the achievement of a short-term goal, which feels really good, but you need another goal very shortly thereafter. Much of happiness is hope, no matter how deep the underworld in which that hope was conceived. Okay, so hope is an imagination of a future which is better, which seems possible by action you can take, that you can grab this better future. That's hope. And the deep underworld in which it was conceived, it would be like your friend who is an alcoholic, who has liver disease, who has addiction to drugs, who is homeless and has no job. That's the deep underworld. But then he gains a vision of hope, and he begins to change and to go uphill. His hope was conceived very deep, very low, very degraded. But it began him in the right direction. So hope brings happiness, no matter how deep the underworld in which that hope was conceived. So it does not matter if you conceived of the hope from a place of degradation or from a place where you're pretty good to start off with, but you still have hope of something more glorious or better. You have happiness in the pursuit of the upward path. I'm wondering if we should move on. I think we do not have time to move on. So let's go ahead and stop here. Well, actually, let's give a little more, because we can at least do a little more. Okay. At least we can read and think about this last paragraph. Called upon properly, the internal critic will suggest something to set in order, which you could set in order, which you would set in order voluntarily, without resentment, even with pleasure. Ask yourself, is there one thing that exists in disarray in your life or your situation that you could and would set straight? Could you and would you fix that one thing that announces itself humbly in need of repair? Could you do it now? Imagine that you are someone with whom you must negotiate. Imagine further that you are lazy, touchy, resentful, and hard to get along with. With that attitude, it's not going to be easy to get you moving. You might have to use a little charm and playfulness. Excuse me, you might say to yourself, without irony or sarcasm. I'm trying to reduce some of the unnecessary suffering around here. I could use some help. Keep the derision at bay. I'm wondering if there is anything you would be willing to do. I'd be very grateful for your service. Ask honestly and with humility. That's no simple matter. Okay, let's start this. Okay, so we're talking about getting on to the uphill journey in order to become happy. Called upon properly, the internal critic will suggest something to set in order. Okay, so first, called upon properly. What it's basically saying is the internal critic has the potential to be an asset. It has the potential to be your friend and your helper. So, if you are able to call upon the critic properly without allowing it to demoralize you or something, then if you are able to call upon it properly, it will suggest something to set in order. Set in order means to correct it, to put it right. Something, for example, supposing I never balance my checkbook. I never check my bank balance to make sure I have enough money for my bills and I am not in danger of going overdrawn. I never check and I have no idea how much money I have in the bank, whether I have dangerously low or so much that I could buy a house. I have no idea because I never check. That is something I could set in order. I could call the bank and find out how much money is in there right now. I could also write down what my income is, what my expenses are, and how much money I have to play with every month. I could make a budget. That would set in order an area of my life which needs to be set in order. Okay? So, the internal critic will suggest something to set in order, which you could set in order. So, not something impossible. Like, for example, I could say, My problem is that I have an incurable disease like cancer. I have cancer, which is incurable. Well, if you can't do anything, that's not what we're talking about. It's something I can do something about. Okay, something I could, if I wanted to, set in order, which you would set in order voluntarily. Means this is something I can do, something I even want to do. For example, suppose my internal critic said, my husband's car is always messy and needs to be washed and waxed. That is not something I would. It is something I could set in order. I could go clean it for him and wash and wax it and even maintain it clean every week, clean it for him. But I would not. I do not want to. I would not do that voluntarily because I feel it is not my job and that if I did it, it would be enabling him to be lazy. So this is not something that I would set in order. However, my own bank book is something that I would set in order voluntarily without resentment. My husband's car, it would be with resentment, but without resentment, even with pleasure. So I would say to myself, I would love it if I had control of my finances. I wish I knew how much money I had so I could begin to save for a house and not be worried every month that my bills will come back undelivered because I didn't have enough money. So the internal critic, called upon properly, will suggest something to set in order, which you could set in order. It's within my ability, and I would set in order. I want to. Voluntarily, without resentment, even with pleasure. I would love to do that. So, Jordan Peterson is saying we should ask ourselves, ask yourself, is there one thing that exists in disarray in your life or your situation that you could and would set straight? So think, is there one thing that fits the criteria? Something that is out of order, I can fix it, and I want to. And then Jordan Peterson says, would you fix that one thing that announces itself humbly in need of repair? Could you do it now? So Jordan Peterson is asking the reader, can you think of something like this? How's about if you do it? Will you do it? He is inviting you to do an experiment on yourself and to find one small thing, to make a small change to get it in order. Maybe it's one drawer in your desk. You empty out one drawer and put it in order. Well, if you do one drawer every day, pretty soon the whole desk will be cleared out and in order. Or maybe you will do one closet in your house or one room of your house. So he is suggesting you do it now, today. Now he goes on to say, imagine you are someone with whom you must negotiate. So I think we will actually stop here because what he is doing now is he is postulating you as an alter ego. I'm going to write the word alter ego for next week. Alter ego with yourself. So you can speak to yourself. You can say, self, get off your butt and clean the carpets. You can say to yourself, I can say to myself, Margarita, you need to get up earlier every day and have a quiet time with God. He is suggesting that we speak to ourselves. And he is suggesting a specific way that we handle ourselves gently, that we be kind to ourselves and be charming and winning, that we be to ourselves the way a brilliant friend of ours who knows us well would approach motivating us to do something. So next week we will read this more carefully, but this is what he is doing. So I will see you next week.